was nothing real.
Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about that ending of Moon Knight Episode 4. We have a lot of questions. I'm sure you do too. I mean, the show was taking us on a neat little Indiana Jones adventure, and now we're at a mystical One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
What do you think you are, for Christ's sake? Crazy or something?
So what's going on? Well, that's the question, isn't it, Doug? We've got a lot of videos coming out about this, including our Easter egg video. My first thought was, oh, this is obviously a trick orchestrated by Khonshu or Harrow to trap Marc. And we also have videos coming out about how this could be the afterlife, a test from Ammit or Khonshu, or this might also just all be in Marc's mind while he's in his death throes. But then again, there's this one interesting line the trailers keep reminding us about.
I can't tell the difference between my waking life and dreams.
Now we know it's referencing the memory loss Steven experiences when he's switching between personalities, but what if this line was actually referring to this moment? What if nothing we watched up to this point was real and there were clues right in front of us all along?
What?
This may seem like a stretch, but think about it. A lot of things in this show just don't add up. It's impossible for Khonshu to move the moon to force a solar eclipse. It's very impossible for him to spin the world back 2,000 years to show the night sky. This does not fit within the rules of magic established within the MCU. So it could all be in Marc's mind. Marc himself stated,
I am unwell.
and experiences time loss in his own dreams. He expresses doubt about his own existence.
I'm not dead, am I?
Stevie.
Am I?
There's a part of him that knows he isn't always there. With an unreliable narrator, we can't be sure that what we've seen has actually happened. A major motif throughout the season is the characters are being told to wake up to reality. In the first episode, Khonshu tells Steven to wake up.
Wake up, Marc!
And we hear these in the background. In episode 4, Harrow screams at Layla to
Wake up!
Well, what if we are the ones that actually need to wake up? Marc needs to wake up from these hallucinations because this isn't real, and he's sinking dangerously deeper and deeper into his delusion. He's only awoken into reality because of Harrow shooting him. He needs the experience of dying. I'm sure most of us know the feeling of suddenly waking up right after dying in a dream. There are lots of times throughout the show where, as the audience, we've questioned what's real, and now it finally all makes sense. So, for the purposes of this video, let's assume that the entire show up till now was a dream, and Marc is finally waking up in the mental institution where he has always been. Harrow explains this in detail to Marc in his doctor's office.
We don't live in a material world. We live in a psychic world. To me, this is a writing utensil. To my dog, it's a chew toy.
According to Dr. Harrow's explanation, Marc is at a big disadvantage living in a psychic world where his own psyche is severely fractured. He gets material and psychic perception mixed up to the worst of extremes, and he can't differentiate between the two.
Everything reminds me.
In other words, as Marc perceives the objects in his real world, he can't see what they physically are. His mind has to reinterpret them as a metaphor for a far more interesting, adventurous life. And all over the hospital, we can see the people, places, and things that influence Marc's vivid hallucinations. It's interesting to see all the people in the hospital have a part to play in Marc's ongoing hallucination. Marc seemed to be having a lot of trouble recovering in the institution, and he didn't get along with the staff. And in his dream, his nurses were followers of Harrow. The two nurses that restrain Marc when he tries to escape Harrow's office are the fake cops that arrested him in episode 2. And their names were Fitzgerald and Kennedy. Yes, as in John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
I invaded her Bay of Pigs, if you catch my meaning.
Another sign of fake names and an indication that this is not reality. One of the other nurses, Beck, was the security guard of Anton Mogart, who eventually was drawn into Harrow's power. Even the patients in the background all had a part to play in Marc's hallucinations. The man calling out bingo numbers is Crawley, the living statue he bears his soul to every night. This woman in the back looks like Dylan, Steven's co-worker that he asked on a date. And Harrow's cult plays a song by Bob Dylan called Every Grain of Sand. This woman drawing is the nice elevator lady that Steven scared in his apartment building. We even see Donna from the museum, and she's still unpleasant.
Be a bit happier if you called some bloody oaths.
And the woman who draws Khonshu was the woman who gave Layla her passport, so she's still creating portraits. Now it makes sense that Marc would transfer the personality traits of his fellow inmates onto their counterparts in his dreams. Now not only are personality traits transferred, but Marc also transfers his actual relationships from the hospital. When Marc is regaining consciousness, we see Layla. She's eating the same sweets that Marc envisioned her eating while forging her passport. Now they seem to be friends in the hospital, which spiraled into a fantasy in Marc's mind where Layla was his wife. But like we see in the fantasy, the turmoil that Marc feels toward Layla in their real life still lingers. There's a divide between them. Layla tells him that they're a team, but then goes solo for the prize.
We won. I won.
Perhaps he feels taken advantage of by Layla, so he fantasizes that he's the one that separates from her. He's the one that gets to keep the scarab, the prize, after they search for it together. When Marc is coming to, we see him in Dr. Harrow's office. Now, Dr. Harrow has him under intense medication, and the nurses under his command restrain him every time he feels free. So, of course, Harrow would be the antagonist in Marc's fantasy. Kind of like how George Lopez is the villain in The Adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl because he just didn't like Max's imagination.
At the end of class, both of you will report to the principal's office. With your parents!
Yep, that's right, a Shark Boy and Lava Girl reference. Could have done the same thing with The Wizard of Oz, but we want to throw something in there for you millennials.
I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
Dr. Harrow sympathizes with the words of the villain in Marc's favorite movie, Tomb Buster.
No tree can ascend to the light of heaven if it doesn't descend to the depths of hell.
Now, these words reinforce the message of balancing the scales that Marc's hallucination of Harrow preaches. Dr. Harrow even asks for
An honest assessment
of Marc, which plays into him and Ammit judging people honestly based on what they have done. Marc dreams of this evil version of Dr. Harrow wearing the same pants and sandals, even sporting the same haircut as the main character in Tomb Buster. Dr. Harrow exhibits the same warm, welcoming demeanor as he does in Marc's illusions. Harrow is assessing him under the guise of compassion and wanting him to become better.
I am trying to help you. I can't help you if you don't help yourself.
He hurts Marc by making him feel weak, but he always poses as the benevolent savior, just like Harrow does in the fantasy. The places scattered around the institution also played a big part in shaping Marc's hallucinations. He's constantly surrounded by Egyptian artifacts, so of course he's going to base his fantasy in Egypt.
Oh my days, we're inside. We're inside the Great Pyramid of Giza.
The hallways of the asylum mirror the hallways of the tomb. We even see this in the end credits. We can see pictures here that look like places in the credits, places he visited with Layla. We see a boat, which influenced their boat trip on the Nile scene. We also see the outline of what looks like a mosque. And we have seen the mosque madrasa of Sultan Hassan in Cairo, where Layla accosted Marc. The painting in Harrow's office was the inspiration for the fight scene in Germany. Now that fight scene plays a lot with distance, making it feel very discombobulated. The guards in the tower at first seem right next to him. The next second, we see that the castle is really far away. And the bad guys also get crushed by unseen logs that actually should have already fallen down the mountain by that point. Something just felt off about the whole sequence. Everything else in the show is so vivid, so it's odd that this feels so out of place. And that's because this is just one painting in an office filled with Egyptian artifacts. So Marc didn't have much reference to create the Germany fantasy in his mind, so the location is a little more surreal and poorly rendered than Egypt is. But the same thing happens with the rooftop fight in episode 3. It's kind of over the top, it's clunky, it's overall jarring. It's also obviously filmed in a studio on a blue screen. The lighting is artificial, and Marc looks too crisp, like he's a digital cutout. The channel Heavy Spoilers even said this could imply that this is all a movie that's being filmed in his head. Now, I should also point out that in the comics, all of this happens. Marc's in an institution, he's being held there by the god Ammit, and then he goes on a journey with his friends to escape. Throughout that journey, he constantly shifts in and out of his different identities, and one of those identities is as a film producer, Stephen Grant, where Stephen Grant is a billionaire financing a movie about Moon Knight. So the same thing could happen in this show. At any point, Oscar Isaac could burst onto the film set for the show that he's currently filming. Another hint that this might be the case is here. During the alley chase, we can actually see a camera operator. And that's the only reason why this could be in the show, right? I mean, that rooftop fight is the kind of fight that someone who envisions themselves as a superhero would create. An over-the-top fight scene on a roof. It's the perfect stage fight, something you can only create in a dream. Not only are the dream places that he visits influenced by things he sees in the hospital, but anything significant to him also makes an appearance. We know that Tomb Buster is Marc's favorite movie, the thrills of an adventurous explorer in uncharted territories shaped by the hallucinations that Marc has been living. Marc embodies the name itself, Tomb Buster. We see a skeleton drop down from a branch, foreshadowing a perilous journey, mimicking the skeletons that Layla and Stephen find on the floor of the disemboweling room.
And I see lots of bones and blood going that way.
The adventurer who has Harrow's haircut is following a compass, similar to how Harrow's team was using the scarab to locate Ammit's tomb. The explorer finds a statue of Koyashali, a lunar goddess. This could be the influence for Marc finding himself at Khonshu's feet, who is also a lunar deity. Harrow points this out when he says,
The plot makes a real meal out of a lunar god. And didn't you say that you worked for one?
The most glaring reference has to be the explorer's name, Stephen Grant.
You're Dr. Stephen Grant.
He is an adventurer who is knowledgeable in ancient artifacts. Marc Spector took the name of his hero and created an identity that not only makes him feel better about himself, but is loved by the people he cares about. Once we move out of the movie screen, we can see more items around the lounge that Marc took inspiration from. The room is entirely white, symbolizing purity and emulating Khonshu and Moon Knight's colors. One of the patients is playing with the Rubik's Cube, which is what Stephen played with to keep himself awake in the hallucinations. And now we know why he wanted to stay awake, because subconsciously he didn't want to wake up to this reality. The jello here is brightly colored, looking like the bright dye powders that the Heka priest used in the mummification room. We see Donna holding a beetle plushie. Now, beetles are a huge motif throughout the show. They carry a multitude of meanings. It was common for ancient Egyptians to use tools and amulets in the shape of beetles called scarabs. The Egyptian god Khepri had the head of a beetle, and it was his sacred animal. Now, he represented the rising sun and the renewal of life. Marc is now awake to his actual reality and will rise to overcome his disorder. Another major influence for Marc's hallucinations are crescent shapes. We can see them scattered around the room, with the clock having crescent moon hands and the drawing on the whiteboard having gray-lined crescents, which mirrors his Moon Knight costume. The gray crescents and circles also make up eyes, which could be his inspiration for seeing the Eye of Horus everywhere.
This whole structure, it's a symbol.
That's the Eye of Horus.
Yeah.
Beck the nurse hands out cupcakes, which influence the big cupcake van chase in Marc's Germany fight. The passport lady draws a bird that looks like Khonshu's head. We start to see more items that influence Stephen's home life. Gus the fish makes his return on top of a pile of books, which could be a starting point for Stephen's amazing library in his apartment. Marc is locked to his wheelchair by an ankle restraint, the same one that he imagines being tied to his bed. Marc drops his action figure, which influenced his super cool dream costume. We enter Harrow's office, and the arrangement of statues and figures makes it feel like Alexander the Great's tomb. There's a pyramid prism on the desk, along with a prominently displayed hooked weapon, possibly the weapon that Stephen thinks he sees the Heka priests using. We see Dr. Harrow's cane, which looks like the fantastical dual crocodile head cane that he wielded in his dreams. He has honorary canopic jars lined on a shelf, which obviously inspired the Heka priests using those jars to store their victims' organs. There's a beautiful statue of the Egyptian god Sobek, along with a crocodile-headed statue near the door. Now, these would certainly inspire Marc to create the basis of Egyptian gods in his head. Sobek is a crocodile-headed god who is also the source of the Nile. Just like these statues are the source of his hallucinations. Gods with crocodile features would be considered malicious if they're associated with a doctor that he regards as an enemy.
Well, isn't that a bit dodgy, like trusting the judgment of a weird crocodile lady?
Even the walls of Dr. Harrow's office look like the crumbling walls of a stone tomb within a pyramid. The pillars on each side of the doorway also resemble the way that Marc imagined the entryway to Alexander's tomb.
Oh, it's got to be one of the big uns.
Now, Marc has a plethora of items, people, and pictures of places to draw stories from, which would explain why his hallucinations are so vivid. But when the medication wears off and he's away from other people, Marc goes back to hallucinating about Egyptian gods. He imagines Stephen as a different person outside his body. Then there's the sarcophagus that he won't open, hinting that something darker is still tucked away, something so dark he couldn't even explore it in his dreams. Now, if this is all in his dreams, if Marc is really in an institution, what next? Is Disney Plus going to close out this show with 2 episodes showing the gentle care and recovery of a mental patient? Nah. I do think it's possible that Marc is a mental patient and that a large portion of this show was in his mind. But it could still be that he was a mercenary who encountered the god Khonshu and that the moon god broke his brain. After all, we've seen gods do this before in the MCU.
Are you alright?
I've had a god in my brain.
So, if this is real, and that's a big if, then Marc would have to figure out what parts of his life have been real and which parts are imagined. It would mean that the superhero Moon Knight would always be a little off, a little insane, someone that the other heroes could never fully trust. Now that is a kind of hero that we've never seen in a superhero movie before, and I would be up for that team up.
But wait, if the asylum is real, why does he see Steven? And who's that hippo lady?
Well, Doug, that's simple. When he escapes Harrow, the hallucinations start to creep back into his mind, because the drugs are wearing off. The hippo lady is Harriet, and she's the plushie that Steven hands to Donna. So he's still drawing from his hallucinations to make reality something more acceptable to him. But what do you think? Has the whole show been in Steven's mind? Is nothing real? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.